Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today we're going to look at a video by Bishop Barron about the story of Jesus and the woman at the well. In it, he draws out 4 lessons. The first is about God's relentless quest of mercy.
What's really interesting is God's quest for us. God's after us. God's mercy is coming after us. Now, how do you see it in the story? Well, Jesus going into Samaria, right? So he begins in Judea in the south. He's going up to Galilee in the north. Most pious Jews would have gone around Samaria because it was unclean. It was the land of the half-breeds, right? So pious Jews went around it. Jesus goes into it. That's the first thing. He's after the marginalized, the half-breeds, the forgotten, all that. He's after us. He's going over the boundaries that we set.
While this is true, there is some context, which I think Bishop Barron likely takes for granted, since he's a scholar and very familiar with pre-Christian times. But I think it's worth being explicit about this context, because Jesus defying ordinary boundaries has been so talked about, especially in modern egalitarian times, that we tend to forget why these boundaries existed at all. The Samaritans were not just half-breeds. They were also heretics. The two were actually related to each other because the Samaritans were descendants of non-Jewish settlers who came in during the Babylonian captivity of the Jews, who, when the Jews finally returned, started worshipping the God of Israel, but in a syncretic way, without giving up their pagan gods. It's complex, and I don't know that much about it, but the Samaritans disagreed with the Jews on more than a few minor points. Now, here's the thing about interacting with heretics which, in modern times, we tend to forget. Heretics want you to call them orthodox. They have, in practice, a driving need for this. We are social animals, and we instinctively demand full group acceptance. And most people, and therefore most heretics, extend this into the realm of ideas. Very few people can tolerate being merely tolerated. Because of this, avoiding heretics is a matter of self-defense. For some reason in the modern world, we think that one man regarding another as unclean means he thinks the unclean one is unworthy of him. That's not it at all. He thinks the unclean one is dangerous to him. You can still see this in how doctors and nurses in a hospital treat sick people. They wear rubber gloves and won't touch the sick people directly and wash thoroughly after coming close. They do this for good reason, because if they were to interact with sick people normally, they themselves would get sick and they would spread disease to yet others. In a hospital, sick people are unclean. Heresy is a great deal like this. You avoid normal intercourse with heretics so that their heresy doesn't spread. If you know anything about the history of ideas, you know that heresy is catching. And this is precisely why it is so important that the Bible is, as Bishop Barron says, the story of God's search for us. God is strong enough to expose himself to our degeneration without catching it. Bishop Barron has a great video, unfortunately I can't find it right now, where he talks about the line from the prologue of John's Gospel which says, "Grace and truth have come through Jesus Christ." He points out that mostly in human affairs, it's one or the other, either grace or truth, but not both. Truth without grace in the philosophers, grace without truth in the mystics. But Jesus unites both without diminishing either. And if you look at how Jesus interacted with people, you will see that he would meet them wherever they were, as far as their actions, but would never compromise an inch on doctrine. He would eat and drink with sinners and tax collectors, but when he was told that his teaching on divorce was a hard teaching, he didn't soften it, or compromise on it. He didn't agree to disagree, or say that it didn't matter. He said, "Let him accept it who can." There's another story of Jesus talking with an outsider woman, which is very illustrative on this point. The Canaanite woman. She begged Jesus for a miracle for her daughter, and when the disciples asked him to give her what she wanted because it would be convenient to get rid of her, he answered, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the house dogs." But she replied, "Ah, yes, sir, but even house dogs can eat the scraps that fall from their master's table." Jesus answered her, "Woman, you have great faith. Let your wish be granted." And from that moment her daughter was well again. As you can see, Jesus was not willing to compromise at all on a pagan being treated as if she were not a pagan. There was, in asking for a miracle, something of the implicit claim to be one of those Jesus was ministering to, a Jew. It was from the God of Israel that Jesus had the power to work miracles. Implicit in asking for a miracle is acknowledging the God of Israel. This is not compatible with the Canaanite woman being a pagan, and Jesus points this out. But she clarifies. She makes clear she is not asking to be treated as if she were a Jew. And when she asked for the miracle to heal her daughter in the spirit of truth, acknowledging that what she was doing contradicted her being a pagan at all, is when what she was asking for was given to her. Truth was a necessary condition for grace. And Bishop Barron gets to this point later on in the video.
Third point, I think very important today, by the way, that the divine mercy is demanding. We fall very easily today into a zero-sum game, which is the more I stress the divine mercy, well, then the less I must stress the divine demand. Right? If I say mercy, mercy, mercy all day, then I should mute demand. No. That's silly. That's a zero-sum, non-biblical, non-Christian logic.
But Bishop Barron doesn't spell out why it is that we so often think that the divine mercy and the divine demand are at odds with each other. It's a very simple reason, which may be why he doesn't say it, but I think it should be said explicitly. We think that mercy and demand are enemies because we are afraid that demands will drive people off from accepting mercy. And here's the really tricky part, the completely counterintuitive part. Why we shouldn't be afraid of this. It's not that we should trust that the mercy will always work. It won't. That's the meaning of hell. There's an old and absurd question meant to disprove the omnipotence of God. Can God create a rock so big he can't lift it? I prefer the Simpsons version. Can Jesus microwave a burrito so hot he can't eat it? If you're going to be absurd, at least be funny. And for anyone who doesn't know why this is an absurdity, omnipotence means the ability to do what is achievable by power, not the ability to do the logically impossible or the simply nonsensical. But while the infinitely hot burrito is absurd, there is a version of this question about God's ability to limit himself, which is not absurd. Can God create a soul so free that he can't save it? And the meaning of hell is that the answer to that question is yes. As utterly strange as this is, the possibility of hell means that God has in fact limited himself. Of course, God can overcome our free will. He's not limited in that simplistic sense. But God cannot simultaneously overcome our free will and respect it. Incidentally, this is also one of the meanings of salvation. God respects the limits on himself that giving us freedom creates, so much that he was willing to give us eternal life in an unimaginably complicated way. He gave us not just grace, but grace in place of grace. And this is why we should not be afraid that mercy will be rejected because of demand. It may be thus rejected, but we should not be afraid because we should trust God. All that can be done for every person will be done. By human standards, more than can be done for every person will be done. Moreover, these efforts will be unflagging and coordinated. Perhaps when we present both the mercy and the demand, we were not meant to succeed, but only to till the soil for another who will plant the seed that will eventually grow into acceptance. God has taken for himself the difficult task of coordinating the needs of all people that have ever lived and making all our efforts eventually work together towards success. All he requires of us is the comparatively trivial task of giving everything we have. We could never do God's job, but we can do ours. It's almost like God knows what he's doing. Also, this is an awesome line.
Which leads me to my favorite definition of evangelization, which is one beggar telling another beggar where there's bread.
If you haven't already seen it, you should go watch the whole video. Everything Bishop Barron puts on YouTube is worth watching. That's all for now. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at. Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today we're going to look at a video by Bishop Barron about the story of Jesus and the woman at the well. In it, he draws out 4 lessons. The first is about God's relentless quest of mercy.
What's really interesting is God's quest for us. God's after us. God's mercy is coming after us. Now, how do you see it in the story? Well, Jesus going into Samaria, right? So he begins in Judea in the south. He's going up to Galilee in the north. Most pious Jews would have gone around Samaria because it was unclean. It was the land of the half-breeds, right? So pious Jews went around it. Jesus goes into it. That's the first thing. He's after the marginalized, the half-breeds, the forgotten, all that. He's after us. He's going over the boundaries that we set.